Well, thanks, Bill. Yes, and thanks for inviting me. This is not an easy talk. I mean, usually talks are like very well structured, right? You have, what's the question I'd like to answer? What's my research design? What have I found? What are the conclusions? This is more of a meta talk. And I'll explain to you why I've decided for that particular course of action. And it's really based on a frustration that I've had as a sort of, you have geeks and wonks. I consider myself a sort of geeky wonk. But the past couple of years, my wonkishness has been undermined by my lack of geekishness. So that's why I've sort of gone more towards the geek side, and that's what I want to talk to you more about today. It's all based on a stream of work that we are now starting. We call it RU-base, and the term RU-base has the base has two meanings. It's base in the sense of a knowledge base. We want to sort of reconstruct a knowledge base on what we know about Russia. But it's also based in the sense of we hope, aspirationally, that it will become a sort of new foundation for bringing Russia studies in the new age, with all the new opportunities that are out there, with their promise and their perils. But that's what I want to talk to you about a little bit more. A bit about my own background. I've worked at think tanks for most of my life, as Bill said. And so there's a huge demand for policy insight on the policy side. This is a Dutch cabinet. I looked for a good picture of the Trump administration, but it's really hard to find one where they're not all fawning over the president. So I stuck to the Obama administration. But we know there's huge amounts of dysfunction on that side. They have a very hard time getting their act together in terms of policy. They're very stovepiped. They're very poor in articulating research requests to us. On the other side, you have knowledge, supposedly embedded in academia. That's why we started academia. That's why we still have academia. Also there, a lot of dysfunctions, a huge amount of stovepiping as well, a reluctance to do too much policy-focused research. So there's a huge gap between these two, which I think over the years has actually probably increased rather than decreased. I mean, we can have a discussion about it if you want afterwards. But some positive developments is the development of the field of policy analysis that is much more, it tries to find information wherever it can. It's not just tied to one particular discipline. And on the government side, and I've had experience, the HCSS is a small Dutch think tank. So we work a lot for the Dutch government, but we also do a lot of work for other governments in a couple of different areas, from Singapore all the way to Canada, including the United States. And so my experience, goes back to dealing with a lot of different these governments, trying to come to us to get some of these insights that we supposedly are supposed to generate. And some governments have gotten a little bit better at this, at articulating knowledge, at recognizing that knowledge is a basic ingredient of policy. It's not only about politics, it's not only about bureaucracy and all the battles that they fight. It's also about what do we know about these things. But so the kinds of questions, think tanks are supposed to be one of these conveyor belts that bring the knowledge to the policy world, and that's where I've been living for most of my life. And frankly speaking, I'm sort of sick and tired of it, which is also why I'm here. But the kinds of questions I've been working with in my career for the past 20 years or so are sort of what's happening in the world, very broadly. What does what's happening in the world mean for us as a government, as an organization, as an international organization, whatever? Foresight, an almost insatiable demand for looking into the future, built on very flimsy sort of tooling for that type of work from my point of view. But still, there's a very huge demand for that. The analytical part about it, there's a policy analytical part. If that's sort of what's happening, and that's what should we do about it? An evaluation question. If look back at what we've done in certain areas, have we done well or not? So as you see, these are all very broad questions. Non-proliferation is not a very big part of that. Our governments are interested, including the Dutch government, of course, interested in non-proliferation, but the demand of applicable knowledge in this field is fairly limited. And so my own exposure to it has also been more limited than I would have liked it to be. Now, if you think about arms in the broader sense, there's a life cycle of an arm, whether it's a nuclear arm or a chemical or any type of arm. There's a sort of natural life cycle. There's a huge amount of knowledge and science and technology that goes into this part. It's a very powerful vector, a lot of industrial interest. Our military forces are quite interested in these kinds of things. So there's a lot of work going on here, but it's really focused on this kind of stuff. Whereas obviously here, maybe more, why do we do certain things? Why do we have nuclear weapons? Why do we have these kinds of weapons? So there's a lot of questions along this chain that are not particularly well answered. The attempt to control this entire vector, whether it's through arms control or through disarmament or through non-proliferation, it's there. It's a much weaker vector, of course, than the powerful vector that's out there, but obviously it's part of that. But there's a lot of other elements here that go in there. The broader security environment, the strategic culture of a country, which if you do not understand those also cultural aspects, it's very hard to really make sense of the more technocratic aspects of that thing. And so we do a lot more research on the right side here than we do on the left side. And I ask myself the question, why? Threat perceptions, the entire decision-making system. It is very hard to understand how certain countries come to certain decisions unless you also understand the mechanics of decision-making. And the comparative literature on that is not all that great. We've spent a lot more money on this, not a lot more research on the sort of substance part, and not so much on all these other aspects. And I wonder, is that really the smartest thing for us analysts to do? Of course, countries then, coming from these different aspects, then have to make decisions. So there's a filter that they put all these elements through, which are usually based on their own perception of interest, which is again something not that much research is being done into. How do countries formulate their interests? Are they just structural things that just derive from the international system or something? Or are they constructed, politically constructed, socially constructed, whatever you want to call them? The values, which are also an important part, are different. It's ultimately these land and policy documents. And again, our almost callous disregard of the systematic analysis of policy documents is astounding, especially from a comparative point of view. So there's a huge amount of texts that are all behind these different elements of how a weapon ultimately gets made that are not particularly well analyzed. And up until recently, I would submit that there wasn't all that much that we could do except for read these documents ourselves as human beings. And we're limited in that. There's only so much that you can read. Well, there's a number of new tools that have become available that may allow us to structure this entire, and this is a very quick picture I made yesterday, so I apologize for, it doesn't look particularly nice, but it does convey the sort of the integrated part of this entire system that we now at least have a chance of starting to untangle in ways that we were not able to do before. So around all of this, we have all these narratives that are deeply contested. Nikolai was just in London for this escalate to de-escalate. Strong points of view on different sides of the agenda. Has Russia lowered the nuclear threshold? If so, why? What are the implications of that? And so we have very strong narratives around that, which are diametrically opposed. And how do we parse those? Right? You have people who are equally smart with same credentials, sometimes even from the same point. Some Russians who think a particular way, Westerners who think a particular way, other Westerners who think another way. So again, how do we, as analysts, as people who try to make sense of what's going on, how can we parse those different things? Now, the problem with all of this is that our coverage of the things that we are interested in is really quite weak. If you open a newspaper and you look at the economic or the financial pages, there are rich data sets there. The economists have done their homework in trying to construct empirical data sets on the things that they're really interested in. And there's hundreds of them. World trade, mergers and acquisitions, GDP growth, hundreds of data sets. And if you look at the economists, you can click on all these things, and beneath that are hundreds of data sets, none of which are perfect. GDP data, which we all sort of use very almost religiously, are not very reliable. There's huge parts of the economy we don't capture very well. But at least those guys have tried. In our line of business, and this varies admittedly across a couple of different fields, but generally speaking, our coverage of defense and security issues is much weaker. It's much more based on narratives. They show pictures of politicians, of things that are happening in the world. They maybe call one or two people in academia or think tanks to ask them, what do you think about that? And that's the reporting on that side. I've always been frustrated about that. And unfortunately, in the think tank world, there's only so far that you can go to start to get better at this stuff. To also start collecting data sets, using text as data, to also start constructing some of these things. And so that's something that I've been very much impassioned by for the past couple of years. So data in and of themselves, of course, mean nothing. There's a proliferation of data. But when you start to give data context, they become information, which is very more useful. It's more structured, it's more organized. The next step, and this is the general thing of information retrieval, this is a general sort of pyramid that they use. If you give it meaning, it becomes knowledge, which can then be applied as you start working towards more purposive action into actionable insights. So knowledge applied from your point of view and with an eye towards what can we do about it, that becomes the feeding ground for finally decision making. Now, if we look at a lot of in our field, right, we have a lot of this here. A lot of opinions, a lot of strongly felt papers, that feed directly into this here. My suggestion is that in many of the areas that we are interested in, these layers are still sorely underdeveloped. We do not have this sort of rich empirical database that will allow us to make inferences that would go up the chain towards the ultimate decision making. And so a lot of what I've been trying to do for these past couple of years is to try to build up this stuff using Russia as an example. Russia is fundable again. There are not that many areas that have the sort of, well, it's ironic, it sounds cynical, but it's really true that you have to find topics that actually people are willing to pay money for. And so that's what we've been doing, trying to rebuild this pyramid whereby there's actually a foundation there that you can build up, rather than just opinions and publicistica, as the Russians say. Now, interestingly enough, this is what academia was supposed to be doing. Academia was supposed to be doing cumulative knowledge building, right? Of course, some of it may be theoretical, but some of them hopefully would be applied. So since the age of enlightenment, we have created academia to start doing this kind of stuff. This is the first encyclopedia by Diderot and D'Alembert. Actually, there was a lot of visual stuff in there. There was a lot of description. So they tried to basically map the existing knowledge of the time in a very visually appealing way. What happens then over the next 200 years or so is that academia becomes extraordinarily stovepiped, whereby the disciplines develop their own vocabularies, their own methods, and they can hardly talk to each other anymore. So you have these, the natural science look down on all the other ones, say, you guys are not scientists. And when policy asks them something, yeah, maybe we'll do it, maybe we won't. Social scientists look down on humanities. What do they? I mean, it's like humanities also feel that they're the only ones who really understand the deeper well springs of human activities or of art. So you have all these dysfunctions that have been emerging in academia, which is unfortunate, right? Because ultimately, if we want to make sense of the world, that's what we want to do. And the biggest irony I find is that some of the biggest breakthroughs in knowledge are no longer being made in academia, but actually in companies like Google or Baidu, who are starting to build knowledge graphs. So they're applying some of these new tools that are out there, which I will tell you more about in a minute, to really start structuring knowledge in ways that are also very useful for applied questions, including non-proliferation questions. And it seems to me that we should not be divorced from this trend. We've been gravitating too much towards the sort of traditional the academic side, and I think there's a great opportunity for us to piggyback on some of these technologies, which fortunately a lot of them are open source, in order to really start building knowledge that can be applied to various things. This is also one of my favorite slides. So much analysis in our field is what I call prima donna analysis. I call it 1.0. This is Maya Plisetska, ballerina assoluta, one of the greatest supposedly ballet dancers. Of course, most of our prima donnas are not as elegant as that. They're mostly more corpulent, older guys rather than the elegant young ballerinas. But the idea is really that they contain deep knowledge. They've studied a certain topic for a long time. They've built knowledge, but it's within them. They find it hard to communicate that knowledge. They write books, sometimes more accessible than others. They go to conferences. They react to each other. But the communication of the prima donna, first of all, is just a prima donna, and we have a very hard time doing quality assurance on these prima donnas. And secondly, how do they convey their knowledge in useful ways? So I think most policymakers have shifted to what I would call the 2.0 model, whereby you're not dependent on one prima donna, which incidentally could be an individual person, or it could also be an institution, which has become the prima donna in a certain field. Now, increasingly, they want to have multiple experts together so that they can compare their points of view and try to synthesize them, have multiple institutions work together to build knowledge. What we've been trying to do over the past few years is what I call analysis 3.0. A lot of these people publish. We now have the ability to start extracting the knowledge and synthesizing the knowledge from a variety of different disciplines across different approaches to philosophy of science into something that we can store in data warehouses and even in knowledge graphs. Let's apply this to Russia. I mean, I have this slide where it's called Russia is back. There's no doubt about it. I told you already about the fundability, which is of course a reflection of the fact that Russia is back as a policy issue. Here's an actor now that says that, he's really willing to go all the way in order to achieve the goals that he thinks are important for his country. Now, if I compare the state of Russia studies with the picture on the left, again, it's a sort of physiognomy that I've described before, most of us. This is a typical Russia conference in Europe. A couple of older people who've done some Russia in their career. Usually in the past 10 or 20 years, they haven't been doing quite as much of it anymore, me included. The level of scholarship is patchy, sort of at best. So we have to be able to get better at that. So we took a closer look at how the field of Russia studies in this particular country, which was way ahead of everybody else for a long period of time, how it really came about. And it really came about after World War II. There was almost nothing in this country, right? It was a faraway island with little interest in entangling alliances across the world, which all of a sudden found itself propelled to the top, the pinnacle of the international system, and it needed to find out something about that. And so a combination of the US government with some philanthropic organizations decided to use the social technologies of those days to bring together the people who were studying Russia all through the United States in centers of excellence, around Harvard, around Columbia, around a couple of other places in the field. So for us Europeans, this was a very sort of eye-opening experience. We've never done anything like that. Even since then, we haven't done anything like that. But that was the reason why the United States has built up such an impressive infrastructure around Russia, the afterglow of which is still very much there. A lot of the programs are still there. There are still a lot of people co-located there. Prior to that, right, Russian scholars were sort of on the periphery of their fields. You could be a Russian literature professor, maybe somewhere in the Midwest, and you could do really great work. But you did not feel you were a part of a broader community that could also be developing also policy-relevant knowledge about that country that they were studying. So that changed with World War II. And of course, after the end of the Cold War, the whole thing collapsed very quickly, both in the United States and in Europe. Less money, fewer people involved. And sort of that sort of, and interesting enough, us researchers then, how do we react? We blame everybody else. We say government has been stupid by not funding us. We knew Russia was going to come back. Why were you so stupid not to fund us? Or we blame basically everybody else except for ourselves. No, what we've been trying to do is to take our own responsibility. Even with the current incentive structures that we have, that are not particularly conducive to working together, that are not particularly conducive to do the sort of deeper research that hopefully we would like to do, we could still find ways to work together in novel ways, and I'll talk to you about in a minute how we try to do that. So we got some money 2 years ago from the Carnegie Corporation of New York, $400,000, which for us is quite a bit of money. We are about to receive a much larger amount of money from a US government sponsor. And we are also about to get, and that's 95% sure, a very large amount of money from the Dutch government as well. So all of a sudden we find ourselves sitting on a sort of pot of money that we can finally use to improve some of the tools that we have, and especially also some of the ways in which we collaborate with others. Around the policy questions that we have, right? Or around the other questions that we have. And some of them could be related to non-proliferation. The same sort of frustration that I've experienced across the board, I would suspect some of you have also experienced with respect to non-proliferation. That's why we started doing this great stuff with sort of open source, all sort of different types of open source. I think it's the same frustration. Rubase has three main lines of development. The first one is around text. When people think about sort of data mining, they always think about the sort of numerical stuff. But some of the largest amount of data that we have is still written in text. Humans encode knowledge in text. That's how we communicate. And so there's a fantastically rich treasure trove of even academic writings, dissertations, articles, of course, which we of course should still read, but we have other ways now to start exploring the knowledge that has been encoded in those documents. So we are building large text corpora, or I should say that the focus of Rubase is Russian international behavior, both in terms of thinking and in terms of acting. So we are starting to build text corpora. I have a slide in a minute where I will explain how we do that. We also are building the text mining tools. Building is a great word. I mean, natural language processing has developed by leaps and bounds, even just in the past year and a half. So there's a lot of new open source software that's become available that we are trying to apply to some of those Russian-focused things. The second line of development is actual numeric data sets, where again, we are trying to collect some of those data sets. The example I always give, people often talk about Russian elite opinions. What do elites think in Russia? And the typical mode of communication on that is, I went to Moscow last week, and I talked to Karaganov, and this is what Karaganov said. And then they come back home, and they sort of extrapolate from that one piece of information that this is the new thinking of the Russian elites. Now, if there were no alternative to that, first of all, I'd like to hear what Karaganov says too. Interesting guy, influential guy, but he's one data point, right? There is only one data set, a longitudinal, sort of cross-sectional data set that has been surveying Russian elites since the 1990s in waves. They have 7 waves. What we did is we did a search on some of these academic aggregators for all articles that have been written on Russian elites within 5 words of Russian foreign policy, Russian security policy, or Russian defense policy. You find about 10,000 articles or so. And then we counted how many of those actually cited the single data set that is available on this, which was done by Bill Zimmerman at Michigan, where you were, I believe, right?
As well.
Well, there we go. So it's one data set. It's about 2%. So 98% of scholars who write about Washington elites do not even find it necessary to refer to the single data set that's out there. Now, frankly, the blame is both sides. The data sets are only available in SPSS or in SAS. Not everybody knows statistics. So what we've just done, we've converted them into Tableau, which is a very easily usable thing. And we're trying to now incentivize people to actually start using some of that stuff. So on the data sets, we're collecting now hundreds of different data sets that are relevant to Russian international behavior. We're also building some of our own data sets, we'll show you in a minute. We not only build data set tools, this is a program together with Georgia Tech, so of course they have a lot of expertise in this area, and so they've been joining together existing packages, and they're also building some new packages around the data that we have. Now the third line of development is really about collaboration. We've done quite a bit of bibliometric work on this now, and it's astounding. If you look at social sciences, for instance, you compare it to the natural sciences, a typical article in social science has like 1.3, I think, authors. So most articles are really single-authored articles. If you look in the hard sciences, the numbers are significantly higher. Why is that? Well, we understand, right? Hard sciences are more experimental, so they have a large team in a hospital, for instance, developing something new, and then they all publish the article together. But what prevents us from doing that? Incidentally, when we looked at Russian area studies, it was even lower. It was 1.2 or something. So they seem to be, and frankly, if I look at the fields of science where things are developing most quickly, it is often in those areas where people are using open data sets, where they are finding new ways to collaborate. So I'm enthusiastic about that. I want myself some of that stuff as well. So we're trying to look now at new forms of collaboration. This will be the toughest part of this whole endeavor. The two projects that we have applied for are 3-year projects, so we will be doing this for the next 3 years. And this is my greatest headache. We had a meeting a month ago in DC, where we had the group of PONARs, which is a program on new approaches to Russian security. It's a bunch of American, but also European, also Central and Eastern European scholars who deal with the former Soviet Union. And so we presented the thing, a lot of reluctance. Why would I do this? Why do I need this? I'm perfectly fine the way I am. Afterwards, we had a meeting with policymakers, state, DOD, DOE, incredibly enthusiastic about this. So there's something about our field, right, that seems to be very reluctant to methodological innovation, to collaboration, for crying out loud. I mean, aren't scientists natural networkers? Don't we sort of feed on each other, whether it's in fighting with each other or whether it's in cooperating with each other? So why don't we do more of that? We go to conferences, which are often quite boring, frankly, right? People present a paper, you have some question and answer, and that's sort of the end of it. And everybody's happy, we can go back home. That's not cumulative knowledge building, right? So we really want to find new ways, and we're actually doing a piece of research now in which we look at how these other disciplines have come from smaller numbers of authors to a larger number of authors. What are they doing differently? And is there a lesson there for maybe our field as well? So once we have done this, we start text mining the corpora. That's the stage that we are at now. So ideally in my presentation, I could give you a lot of sort of, substantive, meaty kinds of pieces. I'll give you some of those, but we're still in the very early stages of that. We're doing the same on the data mining stuff. Now, out of all this, we will have findings. Now, some people will come to this from the traditional deductive point of view, which I have absolutely no problems with. We have research questions, and we want to have the empirics to test various hypotheses. But we are also intrigued by the inductive line of research, which social sciences has basically written off for a long time as not solid science. But if you look in the life sciences or in some of these other sciences, they're increasingly finding all sorts of patterns that are remarkably robust, but that they cannot explain by their theories. They do not just throw them out. They start to think, could the inductive line of inquiry help the deductive line of inquiry, or vice versa? So we really want to look at both and come up with findings. We store all those things in a Russia root-based data warehouse. The results of these are mostly interactive visualizations of literature or of data sets. And then finally, we will start exploiting those either by writing academic research papers or policy papers or other types of consultancy for a variety of different players on either the private sector side or on the public sector side. A lot of it is done with interaction with SMEs. So it's Georgia Tech and HCSS are the lead of the project, but we're really trying to, that's also one of the reasons I'm here, irrespective of the other reason. I hope to sort of inspire people to start doing more of that stuff. Rubis was made for that, right? So if any of you are interested in this, please do contact me, because we are looking for people. Non-proliferation will be a fantastic area to sort of dive into. So, I mean, please come back to me after that. We're also thinking about how all of this can be made sustainable. As you know, access to academic journals is expensive. Some universities have certain levels of access to it. We're also looking into legal ways of amassing larger amounts of articles. I'll talk to you about in a minute. Let's talk a little bit about text. So on we do both English language and Russian language. On the English side, we basically have access to most large aggregators of academic journals, but also dissertations, newspaper articles, official documents. There's separate subsects of Factiva, for instance, which just look at the sort of official statements that either the Russian government or the American government or the Dutch government does. We're also using the bibliometric data sets, which are actually quite interesting as well. For the Russian side, we have paid for access to Eastview Press. There's two big aggregators. One of them is called Integrum, the other is called Eastview. Integrum is a little bit larger, but has some other disadvantages. So we opted for Eastview, which has a really quite nice collection of about 11 million articles of both Russian, central Russian press, regional Russian press. Integrum has more, but even they have a great collection. But they especially have a great collection of military periodicals. So almost all military periodicals are available. You're smiling because you have experience with them, or?
We used to.
Well, we use scissors, and actually we've got the clippings from the newspapers.
I see. Yeah, they used to have that too. Look, I mean, we need those sources, huh? And it's very hard to find them sometimes. And Eastview at least is still doing a good job. It's not cheap necessarily, but at least we have the money not to do that stuff. So what we do with all this stuff is that we compose a search query, and we have a certain algorithm for that. So remember that this is about Russian international behavior. So we first have a basket with words that are about Russia as an actor. The easiest one is, of course, just the word Russia. But if you just do Russia, for instance, you might miss Roskomnadzor. Right? If it's about hybrid warfare, for instance, there may be an article that talks about how Roskomnadzor is changing certain rules in Russia, which may not mention the word Russia. So we have a basket now with a few thousands of words that are all words that are related to Russian as an agent. All the aspects of agency of Russia, we've sort of put into that basket. The second basket is a basket with words that connote coercion. Coercion is a wonderful word for us, right? It's specifically what we want. It's a not very widely used word. Some people may not even understand it. But the press, of course, doesn't use the word coercion. Or even a lot of sort of other newspapers might not, or even journal articles may not use the word coercion. So that's why we've looked for a lot of synonyms. We've done a lot of work. And any of you are interested, please ask me more about it afterwards. And then the third basket is the international basket. That is, we do not want articles that talk about Dagestan or Kabardino-Balkaria or about domestic violence, in households and stuff. We really want international. And so there too, we have a basket of words through which we hope to single out just the articles that deal with international behavior. Now, all of that gets deposited in different corpora, of which we have quite a few. We then look for some golden standard articles that we think are very good, that we then submit to machine learning, that we have people annotate and then machine learn. I'll talk about that more in a minute. And we have a text mining tool, which is called the interactive text mining tool, which was made out of Bloomington University, Indiana, or Indiana University, Bloomington. I forget exactly how the thing is. But it's it basically uses a lot of R packages that are related to text mining. It puts them together in an intuitive way so that we can just throw in a whole bunch of articles, and it creates all sorts of visuals, which I'll show you in a minute as well. On the data side, we've collected basically all data sets that are relevant: economic data sets, military data sets, domestic policy data sets. What do we know about the quality of governance, even in Russia's regions? Crisis data sets like ACLAD, which is a human-coded data set. We're also collecting a whole bunch of Russia data sets, of course, public opinion surveys, elite surveys, but also the open data. I don't know whether you guys have done anything with that, but just like we are moving towards open data, the Russian government also has a website called data.gov.ru, which has hundreds of thousands of data sets in there. Most of them, of course, are not relevant for us. A registry of all the street names in Tomsk. Well, it might be relevant for certain things, but usually that's not something we'd want. But so we've basically gone through them, and you're interested in that?
Yeah.
Yeah. As I was thinking about it, Tomsk, I should have said another city other than Tomsk. But at least there's a huge amount of stuff there, and we're just trying to go through it and try to pick out those data sets that some Russian scholars may not be aware of and that they might be able to use. And we're depositing all of them in a data warehouse, which means just joining these things up. They're all separate data sets, and so rather than having to look at 100 data sets, you can just click on Russia and all the different variables, of which there are about 11,000, I think. Yeah, a little bit over 11,000 just come up. That's a huge amount of work, by the way, right? You think these are nicely structured data sets, but even nicely structured data sets often leave a lot to be desired. But what we're also doing is looking at some of these knowledge graphs, and that's been one of my sort of great surprises. I was not aware of how rich these are. So there's some of them, I mean, you all know, of course, Wikipedia, but there are two knowledge graphs that basically take, Wikipedia is just text, right? But these guys are just trying to extract the relevant pieces of information, link them together, and then they have languages that you can query them with. You have PsycNet. I don't know what, has any of you ever used any of these knowledge graphs, by the way? What have you used it for?
Nothing really related to this.
But did you find, were you impressed by them or not impressed by them?
I didn't really find them too applicable to what I was.
I see. Yeah, so your mileage will vary.
Yeah.
But for some of the things, we really find extraordinarily rich sets of information. And because we're collecting text, we can now superimpose some of these things that we get from these knowledge graphs onto the text. So you may find a name Ivanov, right? So many Ivanovs. But if you could then disambiguate them by using some of these things that are in here, it's actually quite interesting. So there are some query languages that allow you to query those different knowledge graphs and sort of extract from them what you need. For an example, this is the annexation of Crimea and Sergei Aksionov as an actor. And so this is just what you get out of Wikipedia, all the connections between these different things. This is sort of places where members of the Russian Duma were born, the interconnection between them. This is not, some of you may have seen this, is an attempt to structure the different interest groups within the Russian decision-making apparatus, based also on some of these knowledge graphs. It's quite extraordinary. This one, some of you may have seen, this is about social media and the bots, Russian bots trying to use social media. We'd love to do more work with social media, but A, it's very expensive. The Twitter fire hose is extraordinarily expensive, and most work you will see on Twitter uses a whatever it's called, decalogue or something. They have a smaller subset that academics can use for research purposes, but you have no idea how representative it is. So it's kind of still hard to do a lot of work. That's why we have decided to go for more substantive, more meaty stuff than Twitter or social stuff. All right, a few examples of how we do this. The first one is actually rules-based. Have any of you used automated event data sets before? GDELT, IQs, Phoenix, Terrier. Have you heard of them? You have. Yeah, you have too? And have you used them or?
No.
Right. Well, it's just an incredibly rich empirical data set with some problems that I will get to. But let me first explain how they work. So there's a whole pipeline. To mention the ones that they are, so GDELT is the global database of events, language, and tone. So it's a data set that now has about 750 million events that have been automatically extracted from a variety of different sources. IQs, and GDELT is funded now by, well, to some extent by Google, because they also have a multilingual one, which covers 62 different languages, and they use Google Translate to then translate them into English, which is far from perfect, but it's better than not having international coverage at all. IQs is one that's funded by the Pentagon. It's called the International Crisis Early Warning System. It is public, the data sets are publicly available, open source, everybody can play with them. There is one called Phoenix, which is fully academic, also open source, and also for them, the entire pipeline is open source. So you can really play with them, you can adjust them whichever way you want. And there are two recent additions. One of them is Terrier, which is from the University of Oklahoma, and there's a fifth one which I now even forget. So there's 5 data sets that actually do this kind of stuff that you can compare as well. So they have a different amount of sources, they scrape them, they put them in a database, they apply natural language processing to them, they then they format them, they put them through a coder, and what the coder does, it extracts an event. An event has 3 parts. A source actor, somebody who does something, an event code, something that is being done, and a target actor. So if you're interested in sort of proliferation stuff, you could filter out the proliferation-related events that Russia or DPRK or any other actor has done towards any other actor. I'll come back to how good it is afterwards. There's a geocoder that tries to extract where the event takes place, so not just who does it. Russia can do things in Russia or in Ukraine or in Syria or anywhere else, so it tries to extract that. They deduplicate them, so that a lot of newspapers, of course, cover the same events. In order not to be counted 100,000 times, they basically deduplicate it, and then they upload it to the server for which we can download them. This is how it works, an example. This is an article from The Guardian a while ago. You may remember the Dutch military intelligence had a huge coup a couple of weeks ago. So this is one of the articles about it. So there was this sentence in there: Russian cyber attack was disrupted by Dutch military intelligence. So it basically extracts the main elements, and how does it do that? It starts with natural language processing, so it tries to find out what word is what type of a word, because of course a verb is an action, that's where you're going to get the event code. Nouns are usually the ones that do things, that's how it starts. Natural language processing doesn't only do that, parts of speech tagging, but it then also looks at the interconnection, the dependencies between these things, because in order to find really who does something, for instance, the sentence we had here was a passive sentence. So you have to know that the actor then is not the subject, but it's the predicate. So that's what they sort of try to find out here. And so it extracts a triple out of them. So the source actor is Dutch military intelligence. The event was disrupted. And the target actor was the headquarters of the international chemical weapons. So it has the word, it has the verb in there, what was it again? Was disrupted. It has a large dictionary with all sorts of different verbs that are all binned into 20 high-level codes. You see some of them are economic, some of them are political, some of them are diplomatic. These are high-level ones: yielding, coercing, just talking to, making a public statement. So this particular verb goes into bin 16, which is reduced relations. See, this is how the dictionary looks like. So you see there, disrupt is in there, and disrupt has to be 160, so that's how it gets the code 160. Under 160 there are subcodes, so some of them may be military, economic. It didn't find any particular reason to code it as anything else, so it said it just reduced relations not specified before. Then we have Dutch military intelligence. Okay, Dutch, what is Dutch? Again, it goes to look in its dictionaries, and it finds all the dictionary entities for the Netherlands, and so Dutch is one of them. It also has like statesman, which it also gets from Wikipedia, for all countries in the world, so it knows if it's like Putin, that Putin is the head of the executive branch of the Russian Federation. It has some other sort of associated terms for the Netherlands. It codes a lot of other stuff. For instance, religious codes. Is the actor a religious actor? If so, can we allocate the religion to that particular actor? Are there elements in the text that can do? See, when we read text, we do the same thing, right? Our mind does essentially the same thing, but here we now have the ability to do this in a more automated way. So military intelligence is coded as mil spy. So the final code for this is Netherlands, NLD, mil spy. That's the actor. And that gets stored into the database. Let me give you an example of how we use this stuff. There was a big Dutch defense review in 2010 in which not only the Ministry of Defense, but also the State Department of the Netherlands, the Ministry of Interior, the sort of Homeland Security part, they had looked, there was a bit bottom of defense review, and they said we need more strategic anticipation. The Dutch government has to be able to better understand what's happening in the international system and also anticipate. And so for that they created a thing called a strategic monitor, which for us as a think tank, we get some money now to every year use some tools to try to figure out what's actually happening in the international system. Now it consists of 3 parts: a horizon scan. For instance, one of the things we do there is we have multilingual, we call it metaphor, multilingual foresight. So we collect Chinese, Farsi, Japanese, of course English, Russian, Chinese, but also Farsi and other studies about the future of the international system and the future of security. We download them. We either hand code them or we increasingly code them in an automated way, and we try to find what they flag as sort of the key issues in the future. And in 2012, we had flagged great power assertiveness as one of these sort of up-and-coming trends. This is before, 2014. This is before Trump and all that stuff. So the Dutch Ministry of Defense asked us to take an in-depth look at so the question here is, what do we know about assertiveness? How do we know, and how could we compare Russian assertiveness with Chinese assertiveness? So that's what I'll come back to in a minute. So we did a study on that, and that's what I want to talk to you about. We have a whole bunch of publications on this, on how we operationalize assertiveness, the kinds of tools that we use. But this is one of the examples where we use these data sets. Look, if you want to ask about Russian assertiveness, you could ask the prima donnas, right? Do you think Russian assertiveness in 2015 versus 2014 or 2018 versus 2017 has increased or not? They will cherry pick events, right? They will tell you, we think it's increased because of A, B, C. And there's nothing wrong with that, but if you ask another expert, he may either have a different interpretation or may use different data points. Even if you could come to a consensus view between Russian scholars, how do you compare it to Chinese scholars? Well, how is Russian assertiveness different from Chinese assertiveness? Well, these data sets now, for the first time, offer us a chance to start doing that in the same way that economists have been able to do for a long time. So what you see here is, so what we take out here is all the events that have Russia as the source code, an event that we have coded as assertive, so not talking to, but coercing, or all these kinds of things. We take out those events, and we look at all other state actors, so Russia, coercing other or being assertive against other actors. And this is the trends that you see. And so, for instance, you see that an upward trend since 1980. Russia was more aggressive in 2013 already, prior to 2014, than it was in the late Soviet period. Even the Yeltsin period, we forget about Chechnya, we forgot about Kosovo. There's a lot of developments in Russian foreign policy that were also quite spiky in that period that we can now compare to where we are before. The initial Putin period from 2000 was quite stable, but then you have peaks. So you see, of course, the August, you see the Georgia war, you see edging up again already prior to 2014. And this is a Chinese line. Oops, wait, before I go there. This is a Chinese line. The same data points. So you see they're less assertive than Russia, but they're increasing, they're starting to become more assertive. This is the overall assertiveness, because we can just take out the military assertive trends, we can take out the economic assertive trends, the informational assertive trends. So we have data sets that we can really do a lot with. This is the one slide that convinced me about the usefulness of this stuff. This was a study that we were asked to do in 2014. Was Russia still being just assertive, or was it being aggressive? And so this is out of, in that point, there were 400 million data points. So you just extract those that are Russia related. And so you see basically the course of events as we suspected to have taken place. So not much going on in terms of assertiveness around the Novogodnye Prazniki, right, where people are doing other stuff, and where the Sochi Olympic Games were going on. Then you see the huge spike in March, the Crimea events. It sort of goes down. And when you look in this period about Russia events towards China, you really see a quite impressive increase in that. So there's all sorts of subplots that you can also extract from them. In June and July, you see the Donbass peak. So with just one click of the button, you are starting to construct plausible storylines. This is for assertiveness, right? Imagine we do this also for non-proliferation stuff. This is both verbal and factual. So some events are just verbal, some events are factual. So we could try extracting all the non-proliferation related either verbal events or factual events and start plotting them the same way that this has been done. This requires work. GDAL is far from perfect, I'll tell you in a second. But we are now recoding some of these cameo codes to be better in line with what experts think are the right types of verbs to use for instance, assertiveness, or for hybrid warfare, or for nuclear proliferation would be one option. Some other examples of what we do. So these are the data sets that we have. So there's GDAL English, Translingual, IQs, Phoenix, and Terrier, or the fifth one was Phoenix Translingual. So this, for instance, just Russia towards the world. This is based on the Goldstein score. So there is a score that labels every event from -10 to +10. +10 is very cooperative, -10 is like starting a war. So we take the average for every time period. And so you, for instance, see how from 2016 to 2017 to 2018, I don't know what I mentioned, but these data sets are near real time. IQs is every day. GDAL is every 15 minutes. So every day you get thousands of new events that allow you to sort of look what is the changes from last week to this week, last month to this month, last year to this year. And so you can see how they also yield different results. So we only report on phenomena, trends, patterns that we find back in at least 2 of those data sets. 2 out of the 5. Because they all have different assumptions. But if they both say that the attitude between Russia and America is declining, for instance, we'll report on that. If they all have different ones, we don't. Yeah, let me skip this, I've already done this. We also now use this for forecasting. So we have there's a new tool which is called H2O. They call it sparkling water. And so it uses a variety of different machine learning tools. So what you see here is the interstate conflict. Some of you may be aware of the Project Instability Task Force, which is probably the largest event to econometrically establish which variables are highly correlated with interstate conflict. It's a man-coded, a lot of these data are structural data, so they're fairly reliable. So we put them into our event data sets, and we try to figure out which events are highly correlated with the PITF events, and that allows us to extrapolate. So what you see here, this was done last week, the dyads, so Israel to Syria was the most likely dyad. I think this is 30-day models. In the next 30 days, based on past records, and the models are adjusted every day, based on past trends, these are the dyads that are most likely to end up in conflict defined as in PITF by at least 25 casualties in that particular region a day. These are the ones that involve Russia. So Ukraine, of course, the highest, but Syria in there. China, Russia, for instance. When I presented this in Novgorod a while ago, they were quite shocked at this. And so what we now do is we dig into this. Why is this? So what are the events now behind this? What has happened in the past week when we see somebody jumping up the list? It's a signal, right? It's not a I don't like the word forecast per se, but it is an attempt to capture risk models that give you a bit more insight into which ones are increasing or decreasing. And once you see a change, you can start looking as to how plausible these things are. This is the intrastate violence risk monitor. So because these data are geocoded, not just at the national level, so you may see Russia, but you can also just look at Dagestan or at South Ossetia. So across the world, the regions that are most likely to have intrastate violence are mostly provinces in Afghanistan. Iraq is pretty high. So those are the highest. If you look at Russia, for instance, these are the regions in Russia that have the highest likelihood to have these kinds of things.
Stephan, if I can just interrupt.
Yeah.
About how much longer do you think you will?
Tell me how much, if you want me to wrap up.
I want to make sure that we have plenty of time for
Right.
discussion.
Okay.
I don't want to lose people.
Let me skip this. Let me just point out that what we're now doing is that we're downloading all the URLs. So we have the URLs here, the actual sources that were used for this, and we're recoding them. So Georgia Tech and HCSS together have put about 50 million, I think, 50 million articles in a Solar database, which we are now recoding, as you will see in a minute. So these are the things we're looking at. Influence asserted from Russia, influence asserted to Russia, Russian coercion, Russian response. So this is what we're already doing. For the two large new projects that we have, we would be very eager to include a non-proliferation, or at least a sort of nuclear, we'll still have to define exactly what it might be, and we talked to Bill about that before. But this is what we could be doing as well. So recoding some of these things from those points of view to increase their reliability. So we get new things that are more reliable than GDELT. We also have unsupervised stuff. So what I tried to do for this presentation, we've started making a corpus on non-proliferation. So we just used Google Scholar, Microsoft Academic, which allows you to download really tens of thousands of at least bibliographical references. And with On Paywall, which is one of these ways in which you can download stuff legally without having to go through university libraries, we were able to get, so there were about 12,000 items that we found. I think we started in 2000. So about 12,000 items in English, of course, but also in Portuguese, in French, in Chinese, in Arabic, in all sorts of different languages. We try to download as much of them as possible, and we put them in our tool. Look, Bill, you're in there a few times, but this is just one example. These are all full text, by the way, right? So we don't have 11,000 full text articles, but I think out of the 11,000, we were able to download about 1,900 or so. And if we had continued, we'd probably be able to get a few more. But this is the tool we took the non-proliferation corpus. There's 1,400 articles in there. What you can do is, if you're interested in Russian and nuclear, for instance, you can say, I do not want you to analyze the entire text. I think we're still the only ones who do this. We only want the relevant excerpts from a book or from an article. To give an example, on non-proliferation, I think we found about 90 dissertations that were written on non-proliferation in the past few years. That's a huge amount of work. That's 4 years of work that hardly anybody reads. But you can download them full text, and they're not part of this corpus, but they will be part of the future corpus. And so you can start zooming in on those parts of dissertations that are really dealing with topics that you're interested in. So rather than having to go, even just that is already a great help. So you can say, I want anything that has the words Russia or nuclear within 3 words of each other, and then I want the window of 20 words around that. That's what I want you to analyze through the entire corpus. So here you see, for instance, the amount of articles that were found in those particular years. Example of it. Just want to show you some of in the usual sort of word clouds. But this is a new one you won't see very well. But this allows you to actually compare word clouds across different texts. If those of you are interested, let me know and I'll tell you more about it. And then we do topic modeling. So essentially it's an unsupervised way to try to find out which terms tend to travel together through the text. So the most important topic of all topics in this particular subset of about 1,500 articles on non-proliferation was this one here. So non-strategic nuclear weapons, liability, asset. There may be bias in the sort of 1,400 versus the 11,000. But so you see the sort of top, we only asked them here to show, so a topic is a basket of words. You only see the top 3 ones here. You could look at the top 15 or the top 20. And so we still need an analyst. This is not yet the analysis, right? But this is, if we look at the entire corpus, we see these kinds of topics emerging. And then we as analysts have to try to make sense. What is this topic? Can we give it a label? Does it make sense? So there's still a lot of work involved here, but at least you have not absorbed, but you've sort of tried to get some insights out of a much larger corpus document than you ever otherwise could. You can visualize these things. So I only got them yesterday, so I don't know exactly which topic is which. But so over the years, this particular topic has become more important than something else. So now we entered Russian and nuclear, but you could enter NPT, and you could enter basically any terms that you want, and you would see the tool analyzing some of these things for you. Final slide. So there's a text thing of which I showed you some examples. There's a data thing which I didn't show you any examples of, but if you're interested, please come and see me. There's a lot of stuff there. But the final thing is this collaborative piece. So we're at the core of this, and we're trying to identify people around us that would be willing to engage with us on this platform, essentially, to sort of try to find out which tools are most interesting. I should also say that all these things we also are writing instructional materials for. So if you've never heard about text mining, you can go into our topic that says text mining of Rubase, which will tell you which corpora are available, what kind of tools are useful, are there, how to use them, and not just generally speaking, but on the corpora that we are finding. So our hope is to build this into something bigger. We use a tool for that called Rhizoma, which is sort of a mix between email and chat and project management. It's sort of all in one. So these are just some examples. So this is just using bibliometrics. So if you want to use bibliometrics, if you go into this topic, you will see all the sort of tools that are out there, their advantages and disadvantages, how to use them. So again, irrespective of anything else, if any of you are interested in this, please let me know. I'll gladly give you access to any of the topics that you might be interested in, and maybe we can still explore this further. All right, so this is all a meta story, as I told you, right? It's a lot of geeky stuff. But the fundamental thing is a policy wonk who's trying to get better grounding into the empirics of what we're studying, but also the sort of the other stuff, the conceptual links that scholars might make about certain topics. So it's not just the sort of nitty-gritty event stuff, although that is very important too, but it's also strategic culture. How do we code strategic culture? So, how do we code escalate to de-escalate? How do we code hybrid warfare? Any experts will tell you there are subtleties that you cannot put into the machine. That's what we're trying to do now. Dima Damsky is now man coding for us. So he's going through a golden corpus that we've collected on hybrid warfare. He's doing this in the system. And we then hope to have machines try to find these intuitions that he is now putting into highlights. See if we can then, he cannot do thousands, right? But he will do 100. We'll then apply it to the 70,000 articles we have. He will get that back. He will then be able to say, it will suggest other terms that are similar to the ones that he has highlighted. He can say yes or no. It's a really cool little program called Prodigy. If you do this for like a half an hour, so you get maybe 50 or 60 sentences that the machine thought was the same as what you had coded as, say, A, and you say yes, no, hup, back into the machine, it goes again, it recalculates everything, it comes back. So we try to iterate between qualitative research. It's not quantitative, it's not qualitative. It's trying to apply common sense, using the tools also to explore whether they're useful or not. So that's the essence of this. I told you at the beginning, right? I'm a typical sort of security expert. I've done a lot of stuff, substantive stuff in a variety of different ways. I'd be very eager to sort of get out of the think tank world and to have some time, because we have some of the money already, to start doing this stuff on non-proliferation issues. It's a wonderful topic because it's very precise. Some of it is very precise, but it also needs some of this culture and other aspects. So I'd be very eager to explore the applicability of some of the admittedly quite geeky elements that I've given you to the more wonky non-proliferation things. And I'll stop here, Bill. I'm sorry for being long.